Hello, my friends. It's a great privilege for me today to be speaking to Dr. Lisa Miller. She has a new book, The Awakened Brain, The New Science of Spirituality and Our Quest for an Inspired Life. The author, of course, is Lisa Miller. She has written amazing New York Times bestsellers. She's teaches at Columbia University, and she's a good friend of mine. So, Lisa, welcome.
It is such a joy to celebrate the awakened brain, and I'm honored to be in discussion with you, Deepak.
Great. So, last few years, I'm obsessed with this whole idea of awakening and revelation and going beyond the conditioned mind. So I'm so happy to see a book on the neural correlates of awakening. Tell us what inspired you to write this book.
Great. So, Deepak, I started out as a clinical psychologist on an inpatient unit. And what I noticed is that in our darkest moments, in our moments of deepest despair, when we do treatment as usual, psychotherapy that's silent on spirituality, psychotherapy that doesn't touch the deeper nature of life, there's really not a full recovery, or if we get better, we don't become more, and it seemed to me that as I was watching people struggle with suffering, the real breakthroughs came in not just getting back to baseline or trying to think better thoughts about ourselves or trying to review the past one more time for what went wrong, but in really discovering a closer, deeper connection with life itself. That depression was starting to look much more like a knock at the door for our own growth. That depression was starting to look like an invitation, if you will, to deepen our awareness of the deeper purpose of our lives, who we are to one another, and how we might show up in life. And in that sense, depression at times was a form of illness or psychopathology, but I would say the majority of the time was actually a beckoning for human growth.
So what you're saying is that depression is, or sadness, or any shift in mood is in fact a property or attribute of our mind. And there's a deeper reality beyond the mind, which in spiritual traditions, of course, is called the soul. But these days, soul, spirit, God has become a little inconvenient. So we use words like conscious agents and awareness, and that awareness is the background of every experience in every species. Tell me what awakening means to you.
So, as I looked at people's recoveries and as I looked at the possibilities for transformation, as you say, in our own awareness, it occurred to me that we really did walk around in terms of the normative set point of our culture, half awake. And that half awake didn't necessarily mean we were resting. Half awake could mean we were striving like gerbils on a treadmill. Half awake could mean that we were given to illusions of owning and having and being more. Half awake meant that we weren't realizing all that we really were. And that is depressing. That is completely depressing. And so awakening, in the sense that I'm understanding our quest via the invitation of depression, is an ability that we all have within us. It's latent, it's right under the surface, to open our eyes and our heart and our deeper being to a profound connection with the field of life. And when we see, feel, and know our deep oneness with all life, when we can hear the beckoning that comes through synchronicity, when we can hear the significance that comes in the arrival of one another or fellow living beings, we're suddenly part of a symphony with a grand conductor that's far greater than us. And in that deep seat of awareness, life is abundant and full, even when we don't have what we want, or we feel smaller than we should, or we didn't get the girl or the boy or lost the job. We're part of this magnificent, enormous symphony. And that leads to a far more inspired life.
So if I read this book, what will I get out of it? I mean, I'm curious because I haven't read the book and I'm waiting for it. And we're going to maybe have another conversation after I finish reading the book. But what is the point of this book? What is the awakened brain?
Every single one of us is born with the capacity for awakening. We are born with a brain that is capable of awakening. This is our birthright. And we know that in the lens of science through twin studies. We look at twins raised together, twins raised apart, factor out the degree of commonality as a function of shared genes and environment. And we know that we are all endowed with this capacity for a deep common sense of oneness, love, and guidance. Not just a belief, not just a thought about it, but a deep awareness of our true nature is built into our brain. But by way of analogy, much like a muscle, we need to build this capacity. It is 1/3 innate, 2/3 developed. And I would say that one of the greatest tragedies of our culture, which of course we can fix and realign, is that we let lay fallow far too often our natural endowment, our hardwired capacity for awakening. In school, we're actually taught to avoid it for the first 14 years of our education. And in college, often never a word is said. But this is our inheritance. We are born to be able to awaken. And when we do, we are far less depressed. We are far more full of joy and connection. And the world opens up to be far bigger, full of robust surprises, opportunities we'd never fathomed. You know, if I were to say, I really wish I had a bigger job or more money or that cute fellow over there, I'm making a plan for myself out of my knowledge starting from today back historically to yesterday. But if I am wholly present and more than that, crossing the threshold into total awareness, then the surprise, the landscape, the bright possibility before me is yet unknown. It is indeed a miracle. We are built to live on the cusp of a miracle at every moment. We are built to live with a sense of awe and discovery that life is an epic adventure. But if we trap ourselves looking over our back shoulder, if we trap ourselves by obsessions about what we want, what we don't have, but should have, who we wished we were, then we are limiting ourselves. And those are all limitations based on yesterday's ideas. Right now, collectively, as a culture, it is fair to say that there is a post-pandemic depression. Indeed, we have been isolated. Indeed, there has been great loss. And still, this is collectively a knock at the door so that together we can show up for one another and look into life in a deeper way. This is a moment of our collective transformation if we say yes and work with it. And the awakened brain is effectively a code book. The awakened brain shows us our inheritance. The awakened brain lays out for us a path through which in our own lives, and equally importantly together, we can move through our post-pandemic depression to a deeper way, a kinder way, a more enlightened way, a more awakened way of living as a society.
Everything I've read, also experienced, there are three experiences which I find are universal. One is finding an identity, which is beyond space-time and non-local, same thing. Second is the emergence of platonic values like truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity. And the third universal experience I found in every religious tradition, spiritual traditions, loss of the fear of death, because that which we call the self is not subject to birth and death. It's the activity of the self, mind, perception, cognition, changing identities. So as I went through my own experiences, I did actually experience what is called the dark night of the soul. I was wondering who is Deepak, and I couldn't find an identity that is Deepak, a changing body mind, starting with the fertilized egg and ending with starting with the fertilized egg, zygote, embryo, infant, and ending in death. That's the that's Deepak, this changing mind, changing emotions, changing body. But there is an awareness in which all that process happens. But I can tell you, when I went through that, I had what is called the traditional dark night of the soul, not knowing at all the answer to the question, who am I? And then suddenly a breakthrough and joy. Is that your experience in looking at people who are going through this awakening?
And the breakthrough in joy is the discovery and identification with the awareness, with the deep spirit.
Mm.
Yes. And I think that the impermanent ego, the striving, hungry, impermanent ego is a piece of our journey, but it is not the deep seat of who we really are. And we are born with the capacity for the awareness that you described to identify with the deep spirit, the oneness that is us. We are born with the capacity to identify with that which is us, which is eternal. And it is that same seat of awareness, that same, if you will, neurological home, our neural home of awareness, the transcendent seat of awareness that allows us to perceive hope, awe. Why? Because these are the deep transcendent emotions: hope, awe, possibility, altruism. The finer sides of ourselves are not merely beliefs. They're not driven by a will simply to be good or because it's the right thing to do, but because we truly see written into life itself, built into the structure and fabric of life, that there is in every bit of existence redemption. Life is redemptive, that there is in every bit of life love. Love is built into the fabric of life itself, that the universe is loving, guiding, and holding. When we can perceive this true loving, redemptive nature in life, we don't believe it, we don't impute it, we don't lay it down on top of life, but we perceive the true, bright, glorious nature of life, then of course we have awe, and of course we have hope, because life is inherently redemptive. And of course we have greater love of neighbor and altruism, because we know that we are part of this symphony, and it is who we are and incumbent on us and our deepest motive to show up for one another with love, care, and guidance. So our finer selves naturally flow from an awakened awareness. Our finer selves naturally flow when we use our awakened brain.
So since the brain is the correlate of experiences in awareness, in consciousness, in mind, there's, or as you know, the big controversy these days is the mind doing the brain, is the brain doing the mind, or are they both being done in awareness? And are they simultaneous activities of you? And I have seen other research work on that too, that, as people start to wake up, they have a shift in memory, in that they use memories but don't allow memories to use them. Their emotions move more in the direction of empathy and compassion and love and kindness. They have clarity of perception, sometimes very vivid, restful mind, no melodrama in their emotional and relationship experiences. So all that must show in the brain as a neuroplasticity change, transformation. Does it?
Deepak, yes. And I think you put it with such wisdom that the awakened brain shows that there are neural correlates of transcendent awareness, but it's an outdated notion to say that the brain causes transcendent awareness. They go hand in hand. And whether the brain is a reification or materialization of consciousness, I mean, certainly as our consciousness expands, we see the brain grow. There's synaptogenesis, right? So I think you're very, very wise to clear up for our community that we're not claiming the brain makes spiritual awareness. We're saying that there is perhaps a docking station, or that neural correlates go hand in hand with a conscious state of being. And what is that? When we looked at people in a deep state of connection with spirit, people who said, yes, I was struggling. I was walking down the street. I'd been turned down from 4 out of 5 jobs. I didn't know how I was going to pay for my kids. And then I looked up and I saw light in the leaves, and I knew that God holds me. And then I looked up and saw light in the leaves, and I knew that life is buoyant and there was a path for me. And then I looked up and I knew that I would be okay because I was walking in connection with life itself. This deep awareness that despite all my worries and all my fears and my depressive instincts, I am loved, held, and guided. That capacity to perceive, I looked up and then I knew, is the use of our awakened brain. When we looked in the MRI at what goes on during a state of awakened awareness, we found there were 3 loops. One is that just as we were held as young children in our parents' arms, the bonding network comes up online. And in a state of awakened awareness, we know that life itself is holding, that we are loved. The second dimension of awakened awareness is that the parietal, which puts in and out hard boundaries, allows us to know that you have your journey and I have mine, that you may be in New York and I may be in California, but that we are part of one common seat of experience, one common human experience, one common consciousness field. We are distinct and different, and we are one. And the third dimension of the awakened brain is that we are not actors on an inert stage, but that life itself is guiding. We normally go through life in our society with a top-down dorsal attention network at play. I've got to get to work. Did that check clear? What time are my kids coming home? Plan, plan, plan. It's a tactical approach to life. But in a state of awakened awareness, we move from the dorsal to the ventral bottom-up attention network. And suddenly, darting across Central Park to work, I see there's a mother and a young child, and I'm reminded of how much I love my son, and I should call him. And when I do, I realize that was just the moment where he needed me. And suddenly, darting across the park, I see a squirrel, and I realize we really do need to do more to make sure the animals are fed. And when I do, they show up, and there's abundance in life around us. So when we use the bottom-up ventral attention network, we realize very often that the best alternative, the one we hadn't planned, pops in this expanded field of information. The awakened brain allows us to see, feel, know that we are loved, held, guided, and that we are never alone.
What you're saying is so
this is not a belief.
Yeah. No, what you're saying is so fascinating and so actually hopeful for humanity and for our own fears that crop up as we, get older. We start to worry about infirmity, and death is on the frontier. But as you're saying right now, making me think a lot. Even the neural correlates of this awakening that you described so elegantly, even those are an appearance in awareness. So, what we're seeing as the brain transformation, the neural correlates, is me transforming, but the neural correlates and the brain is also an experience in awareness in the same way as the body is, as the activity that we call perception is, which gives us the experience of the world as everything is, it's all that one field of awareness modulating itself and knowing itself as brain, as mind, as body, because every neural correlate influences what's happening in the body, and it influences your mood, influences how you look at the world, how you interpret the world. So this is an amazing contribution where science is really getting mature in that we are beginning to recognize that science does not necessarily explain spirituality. To spirituality, that is actually spirituality as awareness, as consciousness, is constructing the science of spirituality. It's consciousness knowing itself as that scientific activity, because every scientific effort requires theory, requires validation, requires experiment, requires observation, but we've never asked the question, who or what is the observer? And the more I think about this, the observer is not at all embodied. The body itself is a changing experience in the observer. The observer is at all times cosmic or divine or something. What do you say?
Magnificent. Magnificent, magnificent. And I think, when it comes to science, as you very graciously suggest, science is rigorous, science is systematic, but the rollout is pretty straightforward. It's the question that involves inspiration. It's the question that propels our progress. And that can be limited by scientific vogues, by latent secular materialism in our culture. And we're breaking free now. Deepak, you've been a leader in the innovative wave of science. And now, finally, we're seeing method deployed to ask the bigger questions. And I'm hopeful that the awakened brain is part of our collective effort as scientists to realize that we are born as transcendent beings. And when we realize our deeper seat of awareness, we are less depressed. And in fact, the more at risk for depression we may be, the more our parents are depressed, the more we've had past episodes, the more bad things happened, the more we are help healed and even protected against future depressions when we engage suffering to discover our true awakened nature.
My very special guest today has been Dr. Lisa Miller. She's the author of The Awakened Brain, The New Science of Spirituality, and Our Quest for an Inspired Life. We will follow up on this interview with more details in the near future. Lisa, congratulations for an extraordinary book, and let me know how I can serve your mission to help people alleviate their suffering and find freedom from suffering. The book, once again, is The Awakened Brain, The New Science of Spirituality, and Our Quest for an Inspired Life. We will meet again soon, locally and non-locally.
That's beautiful. I look forward to continued collaboration.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you.